Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you had a pleasant Thanksgiving despite the curtailments and limitations this year. A very big thank you to those who contributed to our Thanksgiving food outreach for initially 180 families, but the response was tremendous. In fact, we have added to their little food pantry and we'll be able to add to it for the relatively near future. So the response was terrific. Thank you all so much. Where Thanksgiving is being celebrated by those who I think were down to their last pennies or whatever. So it was great. It's the first Sunday of the new calendar year, as in the church calendar year, first Sunday of Advent, preparation for the coming of Christ. And the coming of Christ is always, we're encountering Christ newly all the time, because our circumstances are changing. We're growing older and wiser, hopefully. And the scriptures come in at that level. The passage from Isaiah, it's known as 2nd Isaiah. He was the one who wrote this as they came back gratis, the Persian Cyrus, King Cyrus, who let the Hebrew people come home and liberated them. When they came to Jerusalem, of course, it was a heap of rubble, and the people themselves were pretty scattered and not unified. So the challenge of rebuilding a nation, rebuilding the relationship with God, overcoming the trauma of being enslaved, all of these things which were intergenerational, they had a colossal task ahead of them. And the passage is really in a prayer format, almost like a psalm, where Isaiah states that the mess they find themselves in was a result, as he understands it, of the Hebrew people's infidelity to God, to the covenant, to the Torah, and as a consequence, to each other. Their society was fractured, split, divided. They did not care for one another as the Torah and the scripture and as God had always invited them to. But in admitting that they have become hardened, hard-hearted, that's a term that was used of Pharaoh, where his heart was hardened. It means close-minded, literally coarsened, no regard for others, thinking of oneself only, the opposite of what God calls us to be and to the people we're capable of being. Corinthians, Paul begins on a very positive note. He acknowledges that the community is rather gifted, but later in the letter, we will realize that some of these gifts that he praises them for having actually is the cause of a certain form of self-righteousness, rivalry, an unwillingness to mix with the poor or care for them. And he will address those later. But like Isaiah, it's not the end. They have the wherewithal to turn around and get their lives going in a better direction. Or as Isaiah says, to stop wandering, a form of aimless journey, going nowhere, in circles maybe, but wandering describes it nicely. The gospel, the gatekeeper who is to be on the watch for the master's return. Now, whatever your image is of the master's return will give you a good indication of how you see God. Is he waiting in fear that the master might catch him for not being alert and awake if he comes and bangs on the door and there's nobody to let him in? Or is he the kind of gatekeeper who's there waiting to welcome home a beloved master? Someone who's coming home from, let's say, a banquet, from a journey. He will come home with stories and gifts. Which image is your God? Just look at the passages, read them, and I will nudge you further when you come back. See you shortly. Welcome back, everyone. We were thinking of your Thanksgiving celebration, and invariably, well, it's over, I suppose, in many ways, thankfully, and yet it's something every American, irrelevant of status, creed, or otherwise, celebrates. It's the celebration of family, of friend and extended family. Now, however your Thanksgiving went, it may have been quite okay. You may have been delighted with the newness and the smallness of it, or it may have been somewhat of a misery. But notwithstanding, the scriptures are similar. Whether it was good or not so good, Christmas is around the corner. Isaiah was aware that the people had messed up, and he includes himself among the people royally. But it's not the end. He prays to God for God to reveal God's self to the people again. But God is constantly revealing God's self. It was a case of they had closed their minds and their eyes. There was sufficient outreach. They had their scriptures. They had each other. They had their holy men and women, their prophets and prophetesses, always reading the writing on the wall through the lens of scripture. That's what a prophet does, applying it to the present day. And it's what we do entering into Advent, applying the scripture to the newness of where we are, whether it was a disappointing Thanksgiving or it was reasonable, but irrelevant of the good or the bad, Christmas is another opportunity, like the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper, I like the image of being awake and staying awake to welcome the master, but the master here is a beloved master, not a tyrant. It would be waiting to welcome home somebody who's been away. You want to hear their stories. How did life go? What happened? Who did you meet? So on and so on. And tiredness is overridden by the excitement of hearing the experiences of someone else. The sad thing is, in the next chapter in Mark, these comments are addressed to Peter, James, and John. In the next chapter, it'll be Gethsemane, and Peter, James, and John fall asleep. And Jesus comes back from praying by himself, and he said, watch, be awake, be alert. But they weren't. And it is a reminder of the humanness of not being alert to the needs of someone else. Thanksgiving, hopefully, was a lesson in being hyper aware of the needs of others and not just my own, their health, their well-being, and the fact that we sacrifice maybe some of our sacred traditions for their health and well-being. But next year will be different, hopefully. Christmas, we can redesign it. We'll always be redesigning. Advent is a reminder God comes to us through these events. We discover the goodness we thought we might not have had or were capable of being or doing. We can do these things, but it's to be watchful as people get older, sometimes poorer, needs change, family dynamics change. Young parents maybe need to be with their children, setting up their own traditions. You have all these wonderful political family minefields, but every family has them. We've all been there, done that, and continue to do it. But the awareness and the alertness is keep your eyes open, your ears to the ground. Take note. Just don't, as Isaiah says, wander into the season as if nothing happened or it'll just be the same old, same old. It's a pity. It's be proactive. Get ready for Christmas, dear God, but at least Thanksgiving. I hope at this stage, I'm recording this prior to Thanksgiving, but I am looking forward to it, I have to admit. And it will be as normal for me. It will be different anyway. I think all my Thanksgivings have been different, and I have to admit that is fine. You go with the flow and you smile a lot and be gracious. Do likewise with the tail end of your Thanksgiving celebrations being this weekend, and look forward to Christmas, however you're going to redesign it and whatever you have learned from this new reality we find ourselves in. God calls us through it. God's presence is with us on the journey of life. Let us not wander. Let us stay alert and awake. Happy post-Thanksgiving and welcome to Advent and a new year, a new resolution, a new staying awake and alert to the needs of each other, welcoming a beloved master, not a tyrant, not somebody we live in fear of, but somebody actually we're open-minded, open-armed, and are in a state of welcome. Take care. I will see you next Sunday.